Welcome to Two Therapists Talking. The hope for this podcast is to talk about important issues related to couples and individuals who are struggling in their lives with many different issues. I'm David Thompson, a marriage and family therapist.
And I'm Sherie Christensen, marriage and family therapist. Please join us as we explore these issues together, and we hope you will learn and be enlightened along the way. Come find us at twotherapisttalking.com. If you like what you're hearing, please get on and rate us and subscribe to the podcast.
Hi, and welcome back to Two Therapists Talking. I'm David.
And I'm Sherie.
We are continuing our effective versus less effective ways of grieving or mourning loss, which we started into on our last episode.
Yes, and make sure if you haven't listened to that one, go back and listen to that one. We talk about how grieving is not linear.
Yeah.
We talk about different stages and how we're going to move in and through them at different times and giving ourselves lots of compassion and grace around how we do this process. So we want to continue by looking at that technically second stage of grieving.
Right. If you don't remember, the stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And we covered denial. And we talked about what's less effective and more effective both. Mm-hmm. And so in this episode, we want to look at anger, which is a big one for grieving and mourning.
Yes.
In fact, there is no healing without some level of anger, because it helps to correct injustice that's occurred through loss. And so we're going to talk about it, but anger is necessary. Anger is not something that is a bad thing just because it's anger, and we hear so much that it's, don't be angry kind of thing. So there's just ways to do it.
Yeah.
More and less effective.
More and less effective, exactly. And it is, because it's an emotion, it is important.
Yes.
And it serves a purpose and a role. But let's talk about less effective ways that might show up.
Yep.
And then we'll talk about the more effective ways. So with less effective anger, that can show up as emotionally attacking others. You might be interrogating, berating, controlling them, having contempt, rage.
Yeah.
This is just dumping on others. We're just dumping. And that's going to be less effective, because then you definitely are going to have to go back and clean up the mess that you just dumped.
It's less effective because you're hurting relationships, right? Which, by the way, you wouldn't even know we're talking about grieving or mourning. This is just less effective ways of dealing with anger.
Right?
Yeah, it really is. So in addition to the attacking, there's stonewalling, or the silent treatment, or coldness. There's withdrawing and pulling away, and withholding, love or affection or attention.
Right.
And that is less effective.
Yes. And so that can look like attacking or stonewalling from a spouse who has committed infidelity.
Right.
Or that can look like blaming someone else for the loss of a family member. There's a lot of different places and ways that you can plug this in. Yeah. So again, remember, as we're talking about grieving, there's not just one area. We have so many different places we grieve.
Right.
If you've been treated unfairly or in a rude way at church or in your community, right? There is healthy ways of showing anger and less effective ways of showing anger. So, again, whatever loss you're experiencing, make sure you're thinking about, okay, how can I plug that in? What would this look like? What would this less effective or more effective way to show anger look like? So another one is gossip or slander, running around telling everybody all the things.
Even if it feels better.
Yes.
Short term.
Yes.
It's hard once it's left your mouth to get it back.
Right.
And
again, I think this fits back with the denial piece we were talking about last time, where you're sharing is really important, right? But who you're sharing with, how much you're
Right.
sharing, how you're sharing that is also really important.
Yes.
To make sure you're doing that in a effective way rather than in a way that's going to damage relationship, damage others.
Right.
So also along with that is sort of that passive aggressive kind of space where there's manipulation, where there's drama, where you're turning people against each other, where you're twisting the situation. Again, less effective anger.
Less effective, along with passivity or self-neglect or over-compliance, which is kind of a
Yes.
victim giving up space, which is less effective because there's things that are going to help you if they're happening and you have more of a voice. This is your sort of retreating from what's happening, which
Right.
we don't want you to be there again. And like we said before, this isn't a measure of if you're feeling these things or relating with some of these things, you're doing it all wrong. We're not saying that at all.
Right.
You'll find as we talk about the more effective ways to deal with anger that you'll go, okay, yeah, I like that. So no judgment, no criticism. We're just
Right.
going through this, and hopefully some of this is sounding kind of familiar so that you're curious about, well, what's the more effective way to do this? So
Right. And I like that you put in with that we're talking about that neglect and over-compliance or withdrawing that passivity, because I think sometimes we think about this in terms of pushing and going too far, but there is that opposite, the all
Yeah.
or nothing space.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we punish ourselves and we have anger toward ourselves and we see it through this withdrawal of ourselves and neglecting ourselves.
Yep. Kind of quitting in a way, right? On
Yeah,
ourselves.
either quitting or punishing,
Yeah.
or there's several ways that can kind of show up, or feeling like if I don't do this, then I can't get my needs met, right? So when we talk about the healthy way to deal with this, we'll notice that boundaries are going to be a part of that. Right?
Yes. A real obvious one is you're attacking physically
Right.
yourself or others. So yourself would look like self-harm. Mm-hmm. You're doing anything that is harming you, or you're attacking others, or you have a show of force. And so it's a really aggressive,
Yes.
pushing kind of an energy or space, which is definitely less effective.
Right.
And again, anytime we're dealing with anger, all of these things are going to be less effective. And you see that it's not just about like grieving or mourning. It's just,
Yeah.
anger, if expressed in less effective ways, is less effective.
Yes.
But anger itself is just an emotion and can do some good things for us. So,
Right. So let's talk about some of those good things or some of the more effective ways to have and express anger. The first one is acknowledging painful things and acknowledging how it is also protective.
yeah,
Anger can be a protective emotion. It helps us recognize something's off, something's not going well.
right.
There's something that I need to do differently in this situation. So recognizing that it's painful, but there's a protective space around anger and fear.
And there's a lot of good things that would never have happened if not for anger. Anger
Right.
corrects a lot of injustices that are happening.
Right.
And so it can absolutely be effective. And
Important.
yeah. Another effective way is to journal about the anger, the fear thoughts, or the fantasies. Again, this is kind of, we've talked about writing and expressing and journaling in the last episode. And this works. This really works for everything, but use this with anger as well. And so the anger that you feel, get it out, and journaling is a great way to do that.
Yeah. I've heard of different people who are going through really traumatic types of things and they have their anger journal.
Yeah.
That comes with all the swear words and all the things, that's the place where they can just dump it all and then put it away and not have it then become expressed to that other person or in a way that's going to be less effective.
Right.
It just goes in there and they can get out, and then they know, okay, now what I need to do in this situation is set boundaries, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But I think you can do that in a journal. I think you can also do that with other people, other safe people, right? Someone who can be present to your painful thoughts and feelings, that can help you process who's responsible for what,
Right.
Like what part is theirs, what part's mine, what part, how does all this fit, that they can show up for you in a really healthy way. Obviously, a therapist is a great place to do that,
Yeah.
but you may have some other people that you can have that be their role, right?
Yep.
You might have someone that you go to who can just hear all of the blah, and then everything kind of getting out, and they can go, yep, that's awful, that's horrible, I can't believe that's happening to you. And then you have a place where you can go, okay, yeah, and then move through and process further about what you need to do.
Yes.
And then that leads you usually a lot of times into boundaries,
Which is probably the most effective way to use anger.
Yes.
Is I'm angry, therefore this is what can or can't happen.
Yes.
And self-protection. So boundaries, setting limits to create safety. Without
Hugely
anger,
important.
we wouldn't have very many boundaries probably. So
Right. Yeah, it is often an indicator that you need a boundary.
Yep.
And so that's a great thing to roll into, is allowing yourself to feel it fully, to process, whether we're journaling, whether we're talking to someone else, and then recognizing, okay, this is what I need to do to keep myself safe.
Yes. Healthy expression also includes just expressing anger or frustration directly, communicating clearly. That doesn't mean yelling and screaming.
Right. We're not dumping on someone
Right.
else.
Right. You're just being firm and assertive and direct and clear.
Yes.
And again, this is something that not only do you probably need to say, but they need to hear in certain situations. And so
Yes.
anger is helping you to have a voice and take your power back. And we've talked a lot about that. And that is a healthy way to express.
Yes, it can be extremely helpful to be able to say to someone else, I'm feeling very angry about this thing that you're doing.
Right.
And it does not feel okay with me.
Yeah.
Right? And then oftentimes boundaries come into that process as well.
Yep. There's a lot of overlap if you haven't figured this out yet.
Of course.
Always.
And then, of course, getting physical,
Yeah.
movement,
Yep.
right? Going for a run, going rock climbing, doing 100 push-ups, something where your body can move through and process the emotion and allow it to release.
Yes.
Super, super helpful. Very important with a lot of, with anger, with a lot of things.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
We're feeling that rise. We're feeling our body escalate, getting flooded, moving your body, allowing your body to process through all of those
Super important.
different things that are happening. Yeah.
Probably that alone will significantly speed up the mourning, grieving process if you can move your body often.
Yes.
It just helps work so many things out.
Right.
I
Shows up in anger. It also shows up in depression, right?
Yes.
Like, it shows up in
Yes.
a lot of these spaces.
It definitely does. Moving into bargaining now from anger. And again, just to, point this out, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. This is the format we're following. Now moving into bargaining. Well, what does unhealthy or less effective bargaining look like?
Well, I think probably the first one that you think of is just obsessing, just
Yeah.
preoccupation. You're constantly going through these cycles in your head of worry, of obsessing, of just agitating,
Yeah.
thinking, regret, shame, what ifs, I should haves,
You
and
get
you just
really
repeat.
stuck.
Yep,
Yep.
repeat, and you kind of have this vicious cycle going.
And this often leads right into blame and shame. You're
Mm-hmm.
trying too hard to fix either yourself or others.
Yeah.
And that's naturally going to come from obsessing about what happened and why and those sorts of things. So
Right. And we notice that again, like thinking back about with that anger piece and not putting that anger on like yourself or someone else, like it's my
Yep.
fault or it's your fault, right? Same thing here. We're not getting into these cycles of obsessing about whose fault and assigning that blame, whether it's me, it's my fault, whether it's your fault.
right.
That creates a lot of issues that in and of itself will often spike, for example, like divorce after the loss of a child,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
When couples start getting into the should have, could have, you should have, blaming those types of things, it
Yep.
can really,
What should have been, what should have happened.
yep,
Yeah.
it can really cause a lot of issues. So another one is replaying kind of the situations, the messages, whether those are messages that other people have told you about the situation or whether it's like even visual images of something that happened. When you get in those cycles, again, those are toxic places to be and are going to cause a lot of issues.
Right. We can get stuck there for sure. And in addition, just circular arguments with others. And so we keep talking about the same things
Yep.
and
Keep
we're not
arguing about
satisfied
it.
with what we're hearing. I mean, I'm sure there are those listening with betrayal trauma that are like, oh, okay. So like details, we're talking about, mental
yeah.
images and details, or getting into these circular arguments where they're telling me, but I'm not satisfied. And so we keep talking about
Yes.
it over and over and over.
Yep.
You may be kind of stuck in this bargaining place,
Right.
which again,
right.
you're not in trouble for it. And there's probably always some level of less effective mourning, grieving.
Right.
It's probably
We're not going to be
impossible.
perfect.
I'm sure
We're
it is.
just not going to be perfect.
Yeah, yeah,
But if you're noticing that, and you're noticing you're having the same arguments, you're having the same things, you're repeating, you're in those
Yep, and they don't seem-
obsessive, compulsive kinds of patterns, and it's just not satisfying what's going on, then you're probably in that less effective bargaining. Oh, if I
Yes.
just understand, if I just dig more or try to get through it more or understand what I think. I mean, again, this can go to loss of a loved one as well. Oh, if I just understand
Right.
this better, or,
right,
and you get in these cyclical patterns, then you're going to halt your progression through the
Right.
grieving process or delay
Right.
it. So the last one again is fits in with these as well, kind of comparing yourself. Compare and despair.
compare and despair.
Yes.
Which is usually what happens from compare.
Right? Yeah.
It's not usually a good thing.
Yep. So if I had, again, this fits right back into the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. It fits back into blame versus shaming, yourself, other people. It's that process of, oh, if I had been like this, or if someone else had been like this, then I wouldn't have, or they wouldn't have done this, and we wouldn't have ended where we are. Again, it's this sort of repetitive pattern, obsessive pattern
Yeah.
of thinking about what's going on and trying to make sense of it.
Yeah. Which, I mean, if you can't, what are you going to do?
Yes.
You could be in there forever.
Yep. So what's effective?
What's effective? Okay. Yeah. Well, mindfulness, what are you really thinking about right now? And so a lot of what's effective just about getting through, I think, anything is mindfulness and being
Coming
able
back
to
to the present.
deep breaths, step back, come back to the present. Breathing is so important in this. But what are you really thinking about right now? Slowing things down and being able to just be in that reality with yourself without all the spinning and all the figuring out, but just slowing things down.
Right. Yep. Come back to the present. Whether you're breathing, whether you're just being more aware of your thoughts and pulling yourself back to what's going on in the here and now. And along with that, you're going to want to watch the if onlys. You're going to.
Only I coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Yep, all of those. Notice that, and you can play them out to kind of do a reality check on it.
Right.
Like, okay, so what if you did this thing? Like, are you 100% guaranteed that the outcome wouldn't have been what it is?
Right. So in other words, is this true, or is it just me trying to feel better and being able to slow down enough to say, okay, when I do that stuff, it's trying to feel better, not because it's accurate at all.
Right, right.
So you want to intervene with harmful fantasies, just stop as well as you can. So much of
Right.
more effective bargaining is kind of a CBT, being aware of what you're thinking about, challenging those things, those thoughts,
Yes.
and just staying in reality, checking the facts, all these helpful tools we've talked about before.
Right, right.
You know, admitting that you were powerless and it was not your fault. Now, this is a big one.
Yes.
This you could probably spend some time in, especially
Right.
when this is the hang up is you feel like it is,
Yes.
which is pretty hard with a lot of this stuff. It's a natural tendency, I think, we have to feel like we could have done something at some point.
Right, right. Ooh, that's tricky.
It's really tricky.
Because, of course, we can all show up in better ways than we probably are in this very
Right.
moment. Like, there's
Right.
always room for
There's
improvement.
always more we can do. Yep.
But also, other people are responsible for their choices.
Right.
But also, no one's perfect. But also, it's not your fault.
Yeah.
And it's important to just take responsibility for your part.
Right. Which you may need some help on.
Right.
Again, we have this ace in our pocket of like, you have help available if needed.
Yes. Because it can be so easy to just slip into, well,
Yeah.
I could have done more.
So
I should
easy.
have done more. And it's so important to pull out of that and be able to get that support that says, you could have been the exact perfect parent
Yeah.
and your child could
Yep.
have still made that choice.
Yes,
Or
exactly.
the exact perfect spouse and your child or your spouse could have still made those choices.
Right.
Or even when we're grieving something that we have done, right? It's so important to think there's so many different factors, right, that are involved in us making a choice or
Yeah.
something happening the way that it did.
Yep.
And we're just not perfect.
Right.
And it's okay that we're learning from our experiences.
Right.
So along with that, being willing to learn and grow and educate yourself, right, about the process of grieving, about the circumstances around, whether it's the death of someone you care about, whether it's around betrayal, whether it's around anything, any loss.
Right.
As you're more aware of, reality of what the actual processes of going through this are, it will help keep you from some of that spin out in your mind.
Yes. That's one of the better uses of your time.
Yes.
Is to do a lot of learning. And really look within, what can you change now?
Yes. Not before.
Right.
Now.
That's completely within your control right now. And positive affirmations. Something we
Yes.
talk a lot about because they're so powerful. And I don't know if I've shared this much on the podcast, but my very favorite, we've covered affirmations before, but my very
Right.
favorite, I've added a word.
Okay. Okay.
It's beloved. So I am a beloved son of God.
Yeah.
I am a beloved daughter of God. These are the affirmations that are affirmations of all affirmations. This is the number one, most important. All of this stuff going on, you remain a beloved child of God. That's it. The
Yeah.
most important thing there is.
Yeah.
And at times that will feel like, well, that's not, somehow enough, or that. No, that really is the most important thing about you.
Right.
And so what can you change now? And based on these great truths of who you are And as you consider everything that's happened, not being too hard on yourself, not being critical, staying out of these unhealthy patterns, coulda, shoulda, woulda, we'll get stuck forever, comparison, all of that. Come back to the truth, check the facts, and as best you can, try to do the things that are more effective in what we've talked about.
Yeah. Okay, we've gone through 3 of 5.
3 of 5.
So we'll see you next time as we talk about the grief stages of depression and acceptance and how to show up in more effective ways and notice some of the less effective ways.
Yes, hope it's helpful. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to Two Therapists Talking. We look forward to sharing more conversations with you. Connect with us at twotherapisttalking.com or email podcast@twotherapisttalking.com. If you like what you're hearing, please get on and rate us and subscribe to the podcast.